If I may have your attention, please. Please continue eating, but our featured speaker today has been called back to Washington, D.C. That's some city on the eastern part of Kansas. And so we need to get started while you still continue your lunch. But FERC Commissioner Marc Spitzer is from Arizona. He was a former state legislator. He's become a hero of mine because he found employment after being a legislator. He was on the Arizona Commission, and obviously now he's a Federal Energy Regulatory Commissioner, so there apparently is money out there for former legislators. Carl Holmes or I are both still looking for that. But this is the fourth FERC commissioner to visit Kansas in the last 8 or 10 years. And there's a reason for that. One, we keep inviting them. And two, they recognize that Kansans are committed to finding answers. We're not just interested in talking. We want to know how to build transmission, how to work through the political and economic barriers, and how to connect with our neighbors. But I've interacted with Commissioner Spitzer a number of times, both at the FERC and elsewhere around the country. He is dedicated to participating in informal and interactive opportunities like today's events. This is where he learns what's really going on, what the real interests are. In our side conversations, he too is frustrated by inability in Washington, D.C. to reach resolution on things. But I found Marc to be extremely knowledgeable and approachable and committed to a robust national transmission system. And with that, please join me in welcoming the Commissioner to Hutchinson and our group.
Thank you, Representative Sloan, for that gracious introduction. And it's my privilege and honor to be in Kansas today. And I think that right, Tom, you hit it with the finding answers to our problems. And I appreciated very much the wonderful remarks of your governor. I appreciate the presence of members of the legislature and the Kansas Commission, our state colleagues with whom we at FERC work very well across the country. It's great to get out of Washington, D.C. And it's not just the humidity, it's the some of the polarized, poisoned atmosphere. And I've been in politics for 20 years now, and it's not what it used to be, sadly. And the answers, I don't think, are necessarily found in Washington. They're found around the country. And one of the great opportunities at FERC is to travel the country and to listen to the folks. And some of those who call themselves self-described conservative Republicans, and I am, I don't hide behind any pretense of that, ought to, who say that they oppose renewable energy, ought to come to Kansas and listen to Boyd Orr. I think it would be a nice wake-up call to get their rear ends on a plane out here. And I'm from Arizona. We're known for that straight talk, and you stand for what you believe in. And I'll tell you what I believe in. I believe in markets, energy infrastructure, and rule of law to provide benefits to the ratepayers of the United States. That's my constituency. As much as I'm concerned about and support the industry, my constituency is the ratepayers of the United States. And I had it caused me, I ran into a woman who worked for Congressman Morris Udall, icon in the United States Congress from Arizona, he came within 1 point of winning the primary in New Hampshire in 1976. And had he beaten Jimmy Carter, we would have had arguably a different result, maybe not have had the Reagan Revolution, and history could have taken quite a bit of a different turn. But Mo Udall came in second, just like Barry Goldwater came in second, and Senator McCain, my former law client, came in second. You know, they say that Arizona is the only state in the union where parents cannot tell their children they can one day grow up to be president of the United States. But I was a very young lawyer sitting in my law office in Phoenix, and I received a phone call from the Republican headquarters saying, we'd like you to debate Morris Udall. And I said, well, that's very nice, but why not the Republican candidate running against him? And they said, well, we have a little bit of a problem. Number one, he's an idiot and incapable of speaking in the same room with Morris Udall. And he went, so I said, okay, I'll go. And I went out there, and Mo's district was largely in Tucson, but a small sliver went up into Phoenix. And so he didn't get up to Phoenix that often. The onset of Parkinson's was certainly not yet obvious. He was in good health then. And as a consequence of him being not in Phoenix that often, there was an enormous crowd of supporters of Congressman Udall in attendance. And I started off with my little speech, and I was in law school, and I was in debate, and this and that. After about 5 minutes, Mo Udall cut me to shreds. And during the hour debate, I kept looking, please let this end. Please, merciful God, let this end. And at the end of the debate, I'm there utterly demoralized. The sea of humanity comes up to greet Congressman Udall, his adoring constituents, and wanted to shake his hand and congratulate him. And Mo parted this wave of humanity and went over to where I was seated, abjectly dejected and defeated. And he said, young man, shook my hand, young man, I think you may have a future in politics. And I said, right, it's not real obvious, Congressman. He said, I know you're kind of dejected, you got your dauber down. I remember he used those words. But I thought you did a good job. Never, ever lack the courage to stand up for what you believe in. That was the advice that I received as a young lawyer in 1984. And I continue to take that admonition, and I believe that the ratepayers are served by transparent, vigorous energy markets that presumes that electricity is a commodity. That's not a view that's universally held throughout the country. There are some folks on the extreme left and the extreme right who reject that view. That view of energy as a commodity is consistent with the belief in this audience that we need a robust transmission system that leads into the issue of energy infrastructure. And I was an elected, Arizona elects commissioners, as do a number of states, including Kansas. And I had to site power plants and transmission lines in people's backyards. And then the next day I had to ask for their support at the general election, which made it, quite a challenge. I was speaking with Tom about, someone brought up Colorado. There's a wealthy hedge fund billionaire who's bought large tracts of land in Colorado and is opposed to transmission and opposed to any of the development. He's not opposed to the generation projects. He's opposed to the transmission with regard to his property. He's a billionaire in Manhattan. Colorado's his playground. He has no connection with the people of Colorado. He has no interest in the health, welfare, and safety of the people of Colorado. I don't know whether he's considered whether electricity is a commodity. I had a similar confrontation in Arizona. We were proposing to build a power line, and it went through Scottsdale, a very wealthy, it was not my Senate district. I was sort of old money, Phoenix, and Scottsdale was sort of the nouveau, and they objected. A lot of them were out-of-state citizens who had very expensive second homes. They similarly lacked a commitment to the people of Arizona. And so I dug through my old college philosophy and found Rousseau's Social Compact. And in our order, I wrote into the order the Rousseau Social Compact, and there were some people who were somewhat quizzical. But the concept was noblesse oblige, which means nobility obligates, translated from the French. And Rousseau believed that as part of the social compact, you had this obligation. And in fact, those who were more well off, who were often the most vigorous, vicious NIMBYs, they have it wrong. They have a higher obligation to support their community than those who are less of means. And they should be shamed. And I attempted to use shame. Shame is perhaps underused in our society these days. Look at TV, or I don't look at TV, but my son does, and fraught with peril, an absence of shame, and sometimes shame is a positive, and we got those lines cited. And in fact, there was no litigation, and In my reelection, I checked those precincts, and I actually did okay. I think sometimes you do the right thing, and what was the old Twain saying? People will be shocked and surprised, and maybe it'll turn out well. We had another line sighting case where we had 492 people in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, signed up to oppose a power line that was actually needed for reliability. I mean, you've got economic, environmental issues that are the focus, but in some cases, power lines that are essential to the reliability of the grid are not being built, largely on the coast. And 492 people, and we were at that point, the night before the Iraq war had started, and I began the hearing at the commission with Navy Commander Mike Gleason, who was interesting. He got elected to the commission at age 82. So there is life in politics, even well beyond our ages, Tom. And he was a naval commander, and I asked him to stand up, and we didn't normally do the Pledge of Allegiance and sing the national anthem, but I asked Commissioner Gleason to lead us. And I gave a little speech, and I appreciate the tradition of Lake Havasu City and the fact that your board of supervisors and local politicians have expressed opposition to this line, but we feel it's necessary for the grid, but we're here to hear your comments, and we'll proceed. And of the 492 people who signed up to speak, 0 ended up speaking. And there was one man came up with he had an aircraft carrier hat on, so he'd served, I think, I can't remember which carrier it was. He went up to me and said, that power line's really ugly. But in light of what you said, in light of what Commissioner Gleason said, and in light of what we're told about the national security issue, as ugly as the line is, I really didn't think it was worth my time to complain about it. And most of my colleagues agreed. And so I'm maybe naive in my view that if we pose the issue properly, we can make the case for infrastructure. And we can make the case for rule of law. I had the opportunity, I never had the opportunity to argue a case before the United States Supreme Court. I guess I wasn't that good a lawyer. But early in my tenure at FERC, in the case of Morgan Stanley versus ultimately arising from the California energy crisis litigation, so it was the state of California versus Morgan Stanley, the Supreme Court affirmed orders of the FERC by my predecessors that upheld legitimate contracts. This is not the Enron contracts, but these were the legitimate contracts for the sale of power that were, in the California energy crisis, politically unpopular. They were valid, lawful contracts. And commerce cannot be sustained without valid contracts. I had a friend from Arizona who went to Kiev. He got to write the commercial code for Ukraine after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And to make a long story short, the courts were corrupt and the contracts were not being enforced, and it didn't matter the nature of his legal efforts to create a commercial code. If the judicial system is unwilling or unable to enforce a bilateral executory contract, commerce, as we know, cannot exist. And similarly in the law of energy. I was later told that there was a 100 basis point, at a minimum, discount to contracts in California before the Morgan Stanley case was ultimately resolved by the Supreme Court. It was that the markets were that fearful of political interference. And so FERC upheld contracts during a time when it was not politically popular to do so. They did the right thing rather than what was politically expedient. And the oral argument before the Supreme Court was just wonderful. All the justices were engaged. They all asked questions. And we ultimately got a 9-0 verdict in favor of FERC, and my predecessors, not my vote, but the institution, and in favor of rule of law. And that was gratifying. I will say a few things about FERC in the context of Washington, D.C., because it's an agency that I'm very lucky to be associated with. We have a group of people that are Republicans and Democrats that pull together. And in the major FERC orders, and I am going to talk about Order 1000 in the historical context, I think, because you can read the order, or if you don't want to read the order, you can read what I said the order says. It's about 3 pages instead of 600 pages. And that the historical and context of it is very important in light of the polarization that is currently in existence in Washington, D.C. I go down to the gym at FERC. I try and keep in decent shape, and I ride the bike. And I didn't ask for the TVs, but they put TVs in front of the bikes and the treadmills. And as you might imagine, on the left side is MSNBC, and on the right side is Fox News. And there's utter, I mean, I'm all for political discourse, and Lord knows I'm a creature of politics. But the utter polarization is very evident, just watching those TVs. And, you hear people say, well, we need to energize the base. The left wing says we need to energize our base, and the right wing says we need to energize our base. You watch the TV, the base is energized, dude. They're highly caffeinated bases in this country. They do not suffer from a lack of energization. What we need is some reasoned discourse. And what goes on at FERC is first a view of the importance of history. And I was a history major, and I have to think it's important. And Heinrich Heine said those who fail to learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat its mistakes, and I agree with that. And the history, insofar it relates to FERC Order 1000, is a long-standing commitment of energy policy, and to the predecessors in Congress, our forebears, both Republican and Democrat, who crafted the decontrol of price of natural gas that led to the price signals that created the technology of hydraulic fracturing that, if done properly and under strict environmental controls, can greatly benefit the ratepayers of this country. It has to be done properly. But the commitment to markets through the price signals, infrastructure, FERC has cited 10,000 miles of interstate natural gas pipelines during my tenure, as opposed to how many miles of interstate electric. It's by a factor of 100 to 1. We've just not gotten the electric built. And I think gas infrastructure and pipeline is the model. Because of the presence of the shale gas and the production of shale gas at prices, retail all in can be $4. Some of the production basins are under $3. When I was an Arizona commissioner, the prices reached $15 after Hurricane Katrina. And I had to pass through those prices to my ratepayers in Arizona. And I had women in tears holding up their Social Security checks saying, my entire check is going to energy, in tears. And the commission was gravely concerned about this. I checked the price schedules, the basis differentials, because of the new pipelines across Arizona and, frankly, the entire country. The basis between Topac and the San Juan Basin during the worst days, it was $7, $8, $9, has dropped to 3 cents. It's the best thing that has happened to the ratepayers without much hubbub. We don't expect congratulations. We're from Washington, D.C. That's not going to happen. But it was that commitment and alignment of markets, infrastructure, and rule of law that has unchained the great innovation and technology of the people of this country. And it allowed the commitment of capital. And I will say this about the capital markets. You had an implosion in 2008, and the markets went haywire and capital was frozen. It was the energy sector that led this country. And I know we have a number of utility people, we have a number of people in various sectors of energy, transmission, generation, distribution. They deserve a lot of credit for maintaining their fiscal integrity when other entities were in horrible shape. Some of the Arizona utilities were BBB minus. In other words, Standard & Poor's had grave concerns about their ability to pay their debt, defease the debt. In the meantime, these collateral debt instruments that were backed by third mortgages in El Centro, California, were rated AAA, these securitized bonds. So Standard & Poor's thought they were AAA, and a company like Public Service of New Mexico was considered junk that had assets and generating plants and customers and been doing business and paying its debts and its bills and investing in the people of New Mexico for 100 years. That was a junk bond, but the CDOs were AAA. I'm not that smart. Somebody's going to have to explain that to me. But the energy sector maintained its financial integrity, and we haven't had those catastrophes that we've had in other sectors, and I think that is consistent with the good regulation that we've seen throughout the country, and it's frankly at the state. It's not the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. It's the state commissions that have done a good job balancing the interests of the ratepayers and the companies and ensuring reliable power at affordable prices for the people of this country. So we have this common constituency. It doesn't happen by accident. It takes an awful lot of work. To get back to the historical origin of Order 1000, it was the Energy Policy Act of 1992 that made the declaration on electricity that had been made with respect to natural gas, that electricity is a commodity. And I think it was Congressman Phil Sharp in the U.S. House, and I believe he got 380 votes for that legislation in the U.S. House. He was a Democrat from Indiana who worked with Republicans and sought compromise. Sounds a little arcane historically, does it? Quaint. Thank you very much. And, you know, 380 some votes, I don't think you get 382 votes in the House that the sun rises in the east. I mean, the Arizona delegation, bless their souls, except for Congressman Giffords, they voted no on the debt ceiling legislation. My Democrat friends, both of whom I know very well, voted no, saying this legislation will lead to the poor and the elderly dying in the streets. And the Republicans voted no, saying this legislation makes us into Greece. It was the same bill that they were just, we have alternative reality. And so their only consensus of compromise was their only consensus was this was bad. Nobody liked it. And that was not what Phil Sharp accomplished when he made the seminal declaration with the Energy Policy Act of 1992, and it was taken up by FERC in Order 888. There was a democratically controlled FERC, and then the Republicans continued with Order 2000 to establish RTOs, and then early in my tenure, Order 890 was promulgated in order to correct some of the issues that had not been fully developed in Order 888 to prevent the undue discrimination, which is a term of art in the Federal Power Act, but it describes a circumstance where ratepayers are disadvantaged. And I keep bringing it back to the ratepayer, where the ratepayers are disadvantaged because the incumbent utilities are using control of their transmission grid to discriminate against non-utility generation. And that is a seminal point of federal energy policy and federal energy law. And in Order 1000, we've taken it to the next level. Now, there's some people that are not happy with Order 1000. Those who are unhappy, and I read very carefully all their comments, and I read the reply comments, and then I went back and asked my staff to get some of the legislative history and regulatory history from Order 888. And some of the comments that were filed in opposition to Order 888 bore a very eerie resemblance to the opposition to Order 1000. That you should just let Order 890 work. Well, the people that said that about Order 1000 were the ones who didn't like Order 890. And they said in Order 890, just let Order 888 work. And they were the same ones who were in opposition to Order 888. So I don't know. I think lawyers are, boy, I used to bill by the hour in my prior life. I think the word processing machines, I think they're just filling in the blanks and redoing the date stamp. It's the same tired arguments, and it's a fundamental opposition to what I described as the three-legged stool of markets. That if you want to preserve your monopoly position, you're selling your ratepayers high-cost, dirty fossil energy in constrained areas to keep transmission out and deny your constituents and your ratepayers the opportunity for clean, affordable, lower-cost energy is not lawful under the Federal Power Act, period. And that's basically the point, to cut to the chase. And understand that folks like doing things their way. I think the prior panel pointed out what I think is correct in terms of two major issues in Order 1000 that were a little bit neglected by some of the comments in the press. One is, I think it's correct that the biggest impact is going to be on the bilateral markets, not in the RTOs. There are some RTO folks have opined that with either some minor changes or other issues dealing with interregional collaboration. They feel they're largely in compliance with Order 1000, and we're going to see, in the compliance filings, in a year or two, as they come in, how we evaluate these issues. And I'm not going to prejudge any of these cases, but where you have a cost allocation methodology that deals and accepts and accommodates the 6 fundamental principles of cost allocation. Principle, the most significant of which is no one is allocated a cost without a benefit, and that the benefits be roughly commensurate, the cost be roughly commensurate with the benefits, which is the language from the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals that we've agreed with and have adopted, and that ratepayers not be assigned costs in another region without their consent. So those are fundamental principles, and that was, the parade of horribles and the S word being used, socialization of costs, by some of my Republican friends, I think is contradicted by the plain language of the order, and there are regions that frankly have done a fabulous job. And in this room, I think I can certainly point out the Southwest Power Pool as being, in some respects, the poster child for FERC with finding solutions, with the Republicans and Democrats working together. You have Republican governors, you have Democratic governors, you have legislators of all political philosophies, you have state regulators and a regional state committee that has done a very good job in forming bipartisan consensus and working through the issues and resolving these very difficult issues, because, particularly in tough economic times, the assignment of cost to ratepayers is an issue that we ought to be seriously concerned about. We are seriously concerned about, but these hurdles have been surmounted, and I have said often that SPP and with some of the other RTOs can be models. Now, we expressly provided for regional variation, and I'm a former state legislator and state regulator, as you know, and so I'm very serious about states' rights. I'm very serious that one size does not fit all, and that we need to have flexibility to accommodate the regional concerns. Now, that's the biggest challenge we have at FERC, is applying a national law, the Federal Power Act, and in some cases the Natural Gas Act, to permit a overarching uniform framework but allow for regional variation. And you look at as the markets have arisen, New England was the first to incorporate demand response into its market. And FERC is Order 745 provided for comparable treatment for demand response, because we think they ought to be, the negawatts have such great both environmental and economic value to the ratepayers of the United States, they ought to be treated as a comparable resource to supply side resources. And in New England, the last capacity auction, you had demand response bidding into the market at the clearing price, and so the additional demand curve in New England was met 100% through negawatts, which was a great victory for the ratepayers, a great victory for the environment, and New England led the way. They have a very tight power pool. There are an awful lot of demand responders. They've really gone to natural gas. They've got high energy prices as a legacy for a lot of history. They've had to build an awful lot of high voltage transmission because there were about 20 years of neglect. They'll be the first to admit that. And as a consequence, demand response works very well in that type of power pool. It's not going to work in SPP to the same degree. And so we need to allow, and FERC has allowed the flexibility to let the thousand flowers bloom. RTO is a four-letter word in the West. I can tell you, I used to give speeches arguing for some elements of the prior FERC orders when I was a state commissioner, and it wasn't, I wasn't on the speaking tour because I was so smart. I was like the only one in the West after the California meltdown who still would speak in favor of competition, just because I felt it was so central to the American way of doing things. And I think it was alluded to by the prior panel. It was alluded to by the governor, that the governor's answer to the question about New England, trying to keep out wind from the Midwest through artificial subsidies of New England energy, his response was, let the markets work, and I think we should let the markets work. And the markets, it's difficult. And I feel the pain of some folks in the East Coast where unemployment is very high and energy jobs are being looked upon for economic development. But if you start buying, I'm not going to pick on any particular project, but if you start buying 24, 27, 32 cent power, you're going to, for every job you create, you're going to drive off 3. And that's not real economic development. And I think in Kansas it is understood. It's also understood that if you really believe in markets and you really want to protect the ratepayers, and I'm both, then it's all of the above. You don't exhibit a bias for one fuel versus another. I do think it's important that the fossil fuels bear the economic consequences of their development, just as anyone needs to, you need to pay the freight. And I had to deal with EPA requirements when I was in the state Senate. In some cases, the EPA regulations crafted in Washington, D.C. didn't account for the biogenic air quality in Arizona. You know, we're a desert. And the issue of particulates is different in the dense, disgusting air of the Potomac compared with the wonderful light air in the West. And it took a sledgehammer to get the EPA to figure that out. That being said, they were, in my view, just as the 25 years I spent as a private lawyer litigating cases against the IRS, you know, although I didn't agree with the IRS in every case, I usually worked it out. I usually solved the cases without trial. And they were dedicated public servants who wanted to do the right thing. Sometimes they needed a little help from me in ascertaining what the right thing was. The EPA eventually figured it out. And the EPA, I'm hopeful, will eventually figure out this issue with the coal plants. There are some coal plants that are very modern, super pulverized, with mitigated impact, and in balancing the interests of the ratepayers and the interests of the environment. I don't think they ought to be disturbed. We got in certain parts of the Midwest, particularly Upper MISO, 35 megawatt unscrubbed 60-year-old coal plants. And EPA says they need to go bye-bye. And they need to go bye-bye in a way that's consistent with the reliability of the grid. And each plant is different. And I think this cries out for a federal uniform solution rather than plant-by-plant litigation, because that just benefits the lawyers and leads to perhaps inconsistent results, and also prevents the type of planning for reliability that we need. Because as plants are either retrofitted or decommissioned, we're going to need a time frame in order to protect the reliability of the grid and the ratepayers. I'm not optimistic in terms of a congressional fix. So it's going to, as usual, when Washington messes up or Washington fails to act, it comes to the states and it's going to come to the regions. And I think the Regional State Committee in SPP is ideally suited to work on orderly transition. And I know you're already working, and you want to hear from Jay later. It's already being worked on in a very positive way. I want to take some questions. I have 15 minutes. I'll leave some time for questions. Just some concluding remark. I've been somewhat negative or pessimistic regarding the Congress with the degree of polarization that's gone on, and I feel that's so. I will say that there are oftentimes very positive stories that aren't told. I talked about, you know, the natural gas revolution that has saved ratepayers literally trillions of dollars. And that's a story that's not told. I was at my desk in Virginia Saturday morning in January, fiddling around with the computer, drinking coffee, and my wife comes down and says, honey, you need to call home. And I said, what's going on? And she had this bloodshot eye, and she said, your friend Gabby Giffords was shot, and the report I heard was she passed away. And just then, my old staffer from FERC, who came to, he was my staffer at the ACC and later at FERC, and he went back to Tucson. His son had a sore throat, otherwise he would have been at the Safeway. It was a mile from his house. He called me and told me about Gabby. And I met her during the campaign, my campaign in 2000 for the Arizona Commission. I was a sitting Arizona senator, and she was running for the state house from Tucson. I met her, the swearing in at the legislature is a big deal, a very important deal. And I went over to the house, 9 o'clock. I'd just been elected to the Arizona Commission, for still a sitting senator, I guess, for a day. And Gabby's dad came in, and I shook hands. He introduced himself and said, I saw you debate at the Jewish Community Center, and I voted for you, even though I'm a Democrat. And I said, that's nice. He said, don't get a big head. Your opponent was not so good. And then she came in, and she had, they get you a boutonniere, and just lovely. And she was so proud to represent her district and so excited. And she was such a good legislator. Being a lawyer, I'm a pack rat. So after the shooting, I wanted some comfort, some artifact. I went down to the basement and I pulled out my campaign file from 2006 when I was running for re-election. And sure enough, there was a campaign contribution from Gabby Giffords with a little smiley, a little post that said, "Go Marc," with a little smiley face, which was utterly consistent with her nature to be bipartisan. And there were a couple times when she was upset with the commission, and I had to go over and calm her down, and she'd always tell a joke or tell a nice story, and she always wanted to be productive. And when she was pissed off at the commission, one of my colleagues gave her legitimate reason to be so. Not me. I was the one who went to calm her down. And I bet I had a phone conversation with the chairman of the Democratic Party. I guess it was in February when Gabby was doing the recovery, and said, Spitzer, something I wanted to tell you. And I brought up that campaign contribution. And he said, we were trying to find somebody to run against you, and that you reported that contribution in your year-end report, and I was a little tweaked. So I called Gabby and said, what are you doing? We're trying to find somebody to run against Spitzer, and here you are writing him a check. Writing him a check. And her answer was, as recited to me by the chairman of the Democratic Party, Mr. Chairman, I respect your position as chairman of the Democratic Party. And you are doing a wonderful job, and I look forward to working with you, and I look forward to working with you in my campaign for the United States Congress. Because remember, at the time, she was still in the legislature. But, I'm sorry, my job is, your job is to do the right thing for the Democratic Party and elect Democrats to office. My job is to represent the constituents of my district in Tucson. And I think my constituents are best served by having Marc Spitzer in the Corporation Commission. Now that's the type of courage and commitment and bipartisanship that we desperately need. I think it happens a lot more than we come to believe. And it's those acts of, like Gabby's, of dignity and courage that give me hope to be optimistic that maybe some of the folks in Washington can work with the states and work with the great people in the utility sector and the developers to make our country the best energy country in the world. And with that, Mr. Sloan, I thank you very much.
Thank you. And while Commissioner Spitzer thinks about the question I'm going to pose that came via Twitter and answers, each of you is invited to write checks to Representative Holmes and myself to ensure that responsible public servants stay in office. Are you laughing at writing the check or that the response? Never mind. The question, Mr. Commissioner, is how does the new FERC role help open up electricity markets to more competition? You've touched on that. I think that they'd like a little more elaboration.
Okay. In the RTO markets, I think we've had a lot of success. The RTO markets are going to have to, under Order 1000, come up with a regional plan that provides for cost allocation mechanism. The absence of a cost allocation mechanism has been a huge barrier to the construction of transmission and bring renewable resources and other resources to market to the benefit of the ratepayers. So the regions are going to have to come up with a plan. The non-RTO regions are going to come up with a plan. If they don't have a plan, FERC will write it for them. FERC will be happy to write it for them. And they don't want FERC writing their plan, so they will write the plan. I'm confident they will write the plan themselves. There will be discussion. Instead of an incumbent being judge, jury, and executioner, there will be greater participation. In many cases, given the size and importance of the incumbent utility, the plan will probably reflect to a large degree their views, but it will be an open, transparent process consistent with the Order 890 provisions for transparency, where it's open, and I believe sunlight is a great disinfectant. And there's a further new requirement in Order 1000 for interregional plans. You're going to have an awful lot of wind in MISO that's going to show up at PJM's eastern door, and they're going to need to work it out. So the second aspect is, and this is one where even the RTOs that, New England thinks they're already in compliance. They may not be. I'm not going to say. But they're going to have to work with the New York ISO and create a regional plan that accommodates the public policies of those states. And the public policies in New England are going to be different to the public policies of Georgia and Alabama. And that's to be expected. But they must come up with a plan. They must have interregional cost allocation. And the final provision, the right of first refusal, I believe that a right of first refusal, an incumbent's ability to bar a competitor, is fundamentally anti-competitive. And I know that's controversial in the industry. I just happen to believe it so. It's that Mo Udall, I'm going to stand up for what I believe in. Commissioner Moeller dissented with certain aspects of the ROFR provision. But on the main principle of competitiveness, he was a yes. And on the issue of cost allocation, every Republican and every Democrat and every commissioner at FERC supports this order. And we're going out. There are people who don't. We're doing missionary work. You're much better at it than I. You're much more knowledgeable than I. What I'm hoping is that you observe the benefits of this order and support us during the rehearing, and then more importantly, implement Order 1000 to the benefit of our mutual constituents who are the ratepayers of this region and of this country.
Questions or comments from, yes, Chair, Commissioner.
No, I'm very loud. Do you have in mind some existing entity that will take over and handle the interregional work that has to be done, or do you envision that there will be an entity created that will do that, or do you think this will be done just by the adjoining regional groups?
I'm hoping to build on two possibilities. One, of course, you have the ISPIC in the east, and you have a Western Collaborative in the west. We in Arizona, we didn't want to have anything to do with California. I know some of the folks in the Northwest, California's the 800-pound gorilla, but ultimately, WEC could lead the charge in the western United States. So you've got ISPIC and WEC with an umbrella, and then a number of maybe small seams agreements as part of precursors to the regional plan. You have a seams agreement in PJM MISO. We're going to need more seams agreements. We're going to need more advanced planning, particularly exports out of SPP. They're certainly envisioned. I know I caught a question about a trace amicus issue with some of the resources going west into New Mexico. Those are all possibilities. They're going to require planning. And I think, but the bedwork of the regional plan and the cost allocation within the regions, it is intended in the order to precede the other planning processes. So the other planning processes are sometime off, and the details then, the devil in the details will be integrating the regional plans that the regions are comfortable with and integrating them in a seamless web.
Another question or comment?
Didn't get any food thrown. That's good for lunch.
Well, then let me pose one, and maybe this will stimulate some more discussion. Former Chairman Pat Wood was big on promoting localized marginal pricing and other issues that attracted dissent from many of the same companies and organizations that oppose Order 1000. Ultimately, this became a major congressional battle as well as court issues and such. How do you see time-wise as well as procedurally the FERC Order 1000 ultimately being upheld or having to be modified?
Well, we spent a lot of time and blood, sweat, and tears, and a couple of us at FERC are lawyers, and we wanted the broadest possible basis to sustain the order, and that is reflected in the order itself and the verbiage. And we didn't, we had legislation in Congress that would provide for interconnection-wide cost allocation, complete socialization of costs. We didn't. We rejected that possibility. There was the Senator Corker amendment, which would be to, in my view, gravely and improvidently limit FERC's ability to allocate costs. We rejected that, and we went for the Seventh Circuit, roughly commensurate. So we take the verbiage of the court, the very court that remanded the order, and I think we're right down the middle of the driveway in terms of how we handled this in terms of the cost allocation. It is true that the standard market design proposal by Pat Wood was opposed. Some entities, if the entities that want their own way right now, unfettered, I question the realistic basis of that assumption, that they should have their own way, that they should not allow for competition to the detriment of their customers. And I think ultimately that hopefully the political environment, people realize the gravity of the stakes, the fact that electricity demand continues to go up. I mean, my child, God knows how many gadgets he has, and that's just going to accelerate and proliferate as we proceed with the electrification of the United States economy. And, you know, even with the dip in the recession, you know, demand's not going to go away. There are environmental consequences. There are economic consequences. And if you consider the foreign oil issue, there are national security consequences to the status quo in this country that's not acceptable. And Order 1000 is the vehicle to get that changed. And if I can, once I've not told this to anybody yet, and my wife will probably kill me. The chairman called me. I think he might have been out of the country. And he said, I would like you to have the opportunity to name the order. And he gave me the choice of a bunch of numbers. And one was 1000. So I went, of course, I went to my wife and said, what order should, and she got on the internet, and she's into feng shui and these other things and vortexes and spiritual. Boy, she's going to be, don't tell her, she's going to be mad. But she came back and said, the proper shui is 1000. And I said to her, will that insulate us from liability? In other words, will we win at the Court of Appeals? And then she said, let me do some more research, and she found some quote about the legal result being positive. So the secret weapon is Mrs. Spitzer. Pick the number, and we're going to win.
I know you're going to have to leave quickly, but for the benefit of Commissioner Wright, perhaps you could elaborate. Is there a role for the RSC to play on that seams issue as the FERC envisions it? Or is it more that the board of directors of the SPP would be the driver, or the transmission owners? Where do you see the push coming?
Well, you know, each ISO is different. And, of course, you have single-state ISOs. In California, just the nature and culture is, and I'm not being negative, the utilities have wide swath. In MISO, it's the transmission owners have an awful lot of authority, and they should. In the SPP, with the RSC having the tariff filing authority, is somewhat unique, and elevates the RSC in SPP beyond which is maybe deemed appropriate in other jurisdictions. I don't think that would fit well in New York. It doesn't fit well in New England. In New England, the state governors have a lot of authority, and there's an entity called NESCO, and legislators and governors have probably more say in New England, given you've got 7 states and a very small territory, than the RSC. They really don't have an analogy of the RSC. And so FERC, I think, has shown great flexibility. And I think in the crafting and creation of the regional plan and then the interregional discussions, I very much think we'll maintain that flexibility. But I think the effectiveness of the RSC in SPP is, and you're in the legislature, if you had an opponent of a bill, you take the bill to your opponent and say what you like on it, and he gets his fingerprints on the bill. And then he's for the bill and no longer opposed. Well, the RSC process allows the fingerprints to be put on the plan, the cost allocation methodology, that then gets universal support. I think that's the secret to your success and could be the secret to the success nationwide.
Please join me in thanking the Commissioner. He does have to leave for the airport.